Hashtag how video games affect your brain. Imagine sitting down for what you think will be a quick 30-minute gaming session, and suddenly you look up at the clock and 4 hours have vanished. Sound familiar? That experience is not a personal failing or a lack of willpower. That is your brain chemistry working exactly as it was designed to work, responding to one of the most psychologically sophisticated environments ever created by human beings. Video games are not just entertainment. They are neurological experiences that physically reshape the structure and function of your brain in ways that scientists are only beginning to fully understand. And the findings are far more surprising, and far more complex, than the mainstream conversation ever gives them credit for. Welcome back to Pixel Pulse, where today we are diving deep into the neuroscience behind gaming, because understanding what happens inside your skull when you pick up a controller might genuinely change how you think about the hobby you love. To understand how games affect the brain, we first need to understand what the brain is actually doing during play. Your brain is not a fixed organ. It is a living, constantly reorganizing network of approximately 86 billion neurons, and every experience you have leaves a physical trace on that network. Neuroscientists call this property neuroplasticity, and it means that repeated activities literally carve new pathways into your brain tissue. Whatever you practice, your brain gets better at. And video games, it turns out, are an extraordinarily powerful form of practice. The foundational research in this space comes largely from Dr. Daphne Bavelier at the University of Rochester, whose studies in the early 2000s revealed that players of action video games showed dramatically enhanced visual attention compared to non-gamers. These players could track more objects simultaneously, respond to peripheral stimuli faster, and process rapid visual information more accurately. The game they used most frequently in these studies was Unreal Tournament, a fast-paced first-person shooter, and the results were so significant that Bavelier herself described action gaming as one of the best training tools available for visual processing skills. But the effects go far deeper than just your eyes. When you are gaming, your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, planning, and executive function, is working overtime. Games constantly demand that you evaluate situations, weigh risks against rewards, prioritize competing objectives, and adapt your strategy in real time. A game like StarCraft, for example, requires players to manage multiple bases, coordinate unit movements, monitor resources, and predict enemy behavior simultaneously. Research published in PLOS One found that StarCraft players demonstrated enhanced cognitive flexibility and working memory compared to control groups, with improvements that transferred to tasks completely unrelated to gaming. Then there is the dopamine system, and this is where things get genuinely fascinating. Dopamine is your brain's primary reward signaling molecule, and it does not just activate when you receive a reward. It activates most powerfully when a reward is uncertain. This is known as variable ratio reinforcement, and it is the same neurochemical mechanism that makes gambling so difficult to stop. Video games are engineered, often very deliberately, to exploit this exact mechanism. Every loot box, every random item drop, every level up that might unlock a new ability is a carefully designed dopamine trigger. The brain interprets these unpredictable rewards as highly significant events, flooding the system with dopamine and reinforcing the behavior that produced the reward. This is why progression systems feel so compelling. Your brain literally cannot resist finding out what comes next. This brings us naturally to the question of addiction, which is where public debate around gaming tends to get loudest and least informed. In 2019, the World Health Organization added gaming disorder to the International Classification of Diseases, defining it as a pattern of gaming behavior characterized by impaired control, increasing priority given to gaming over other activities, and continuation despite negative consequences. The estimated prevalence of gaming disorder is between 1 and 3% of gamers worldwide, according to WHO data. That number matters because it contextualizes the conversation. The vast majority of gamers, 97 to 99%, do not meet the clinical threshold for disorder. For these individuals, the dopamine engagement from gaming is not pathological. It is simply motivating and enjoyable, in the same way that reading a gripping novel or watching a compelling television series is motivating and enjoyable. Now, let us talk about the brain regions that see the most measurable structural change in gamers. Multiple MRI studies have found that experienced gamers show increased gray matter volume in the right hippocampus, right prefrontal cortex, and cerebellum compared to non-gamers. The hippocampus is your brain's primary center for spatial navigation and memory consolidation. The cerebellum coordinates fine motor movements and timing. These are not small differences at the margin. These are observable, measurable structural variations in brain tissue, caused by the accumulated hours of a specific kind of mental activity. A landmark 2013 study published in Molecular Psychiatry, conducted by researchers at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, directly tested this by having adult participants play Super Mario 64 for 30 minutes a day over 8 weeks while a control group did not play. The gaming group showed significant increases in gray matter in exactly those hippocampal and prefrontal regions. The researchers explicitly framed these findings as relevant to therapeutic applications for psychiatric conditions involving reduced hippocampal volume, including PTSD, schizophrenia, and neurodegenerative diseases. And therapy is not a hypothetical direction for this research. It is already happening. Action video games have been used in clinical settings to treat amblyopia, commonly known as lazy eye, with results that rival traditional patching methods. VR-based games are being deployed in physiotherapy to help stroke patients rebuild motor coordination. A game called EndeavorRx became the first prescription video game ever approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration in 2020, specifically prescribed to children with ADHD to improve attention function. The research supporting that approval demonstrated measurable improvements in attention performance that were sustained over time. These are not fringe experiments. These are peer-reviewed, clinically validated outcomes. The social dimension of gaming also deserves serious attention, because the stereotype of the isolated gamer has been thoroughly dismantled by research into how modern gaming actually functions. A 2019 survey by the Entertainment Software Association found that 65% of American adults play video games, and among those players, the majority regularly play with others, either online or in the same room. Multiplayer environments activate the same social cognition networks that any collaborative human activity engages. Theory of mind, which is your ability to model other people's intentions and emotions, gets exercised constantly when you are coordinating strategy in a team-based game or navigating the social dynamics of a guild or clan. Games like Among Us became cultural phenomena precisely because they are fundamentally social cognition exercises wrapped in an entertaining package. There is also meaningful research on empathy and perspective-taking. Narrative-driven games that place you in the shoes of a character whose life experiences differ dramatically from your own have shown measurable effects on players' empathy and emotional understanding. A 2018 study published in Computers and Human Behavior found that players of perspective-taking games showed increased empathic concern and reduced aggressive ideation compared to control groups. Games like this War of Mine, which places you as a civilian survivor in a war zone rather than a soldier, or that Dragon, Cancer, which documents a family's experience of childhood illness, are designed specifically to generate emotional understanding through experiential immersion in a way that no other medium can quite replicate. Now, balance and honest analysis require acknowledging the genuine concerns. Excessive gaming in adolescence, particularly before age 16, has been associated in some studies with reduced thickness of the prefrontal cortex, the very region responsible for impulse control and long-term planning. This finding underlines why the developmental timing of gaming exposure matters. Sleep disruption caused by late-night gaming is well documented and has cascading effects on memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and academic performance in young people. The blue light emitted by screens suppresses melatonin production, pushing sleep onset later and reducing the depth of slow-wave sleep, which is the phase most critical for learning and memory. These are real costs that the community needs to acknowledge honestly rather than dismiss defensively.